Hi everyone, Dr. Karolina Skrzypek here from Med. Today I'm going to be diving into a topic that is really important for women over the age of 35 and something that is near and dear to a lot of the patients that come in to see me, and that is hormonal fatigue. Now, I'm not talking about just the fatigue of being tired after a day or having a tough week at work and feeling tired. The fatigue I am talking about is this bone deep fatigue. It's like you feel like you're crawling through molasses, like you can't get anything done throughout the day. A lot of times, what women don't understand is that fatigue isn't just the cause of a small hormone imbalance. It is sometimes a combination of multiple things happening inside of your body that need to be figured out so you can start to feel better. A lot of women think that feeling tired or fatigued is a part of normal life. We go to work, we have families to take care of, we've got a lot going on throughout the day. And we start to feel like that tiredness is kind of just a normal progression of life or aging. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Feeling significant fatigue is a warning sign that something deeper is happening inside your body and it needs to be investigated, with the first step being more in-depth testing. There are several things that could be driving hormonal fatigue or the fatigue we experience more often and in a stronger way as we get older. Number one is there could be something off with your cortisol pattern. Cortisol typically peaks just before we wake up. It's actually the signal for our body to wake up. Throughout the day, it tends to come down, especially in the afternoon and later in the evening. What a lot of women start to develop, especially later in life, is a dysregulation of this pattern. For example, I see patterns where the cortisol in the morning is very high, and then there's a crash, usually in the afternoon or evening. Or I see the opposite, where the cortisol should be higher in the morning when you should have more energy and you're just getting up for the day, and it's actually really low, and then it starts to go up throughout the day, and by the time you go to sleep, it's really high and you can't fall asleep. Those patients tend to have this pattern of being sort of wired awake but tired at night. So your body is telling you it wants to go to sleep, but the cortisol pattern is making you feel like you're on edge, like you're wired. Looking at your cortisol patterns is extremely important. We have several ways of doing this in functional medicine. We can check your cortisol levels throughout 1 to 2 days using urine samples or using saliva samples. When somebody comes to me and has a specific cortisol pattern, that is kind of very specific to that person. I have had a few patients who we've worked on, we've gotten their cortisol patterns more normal, but I also have had a few where at the beginning, we repeated that test a few times and their patterns weren't changing a lot initially until we made some additional adjustments. The cortisol patterns are unique to each person, and sometimes it is a little bit more difficult to get them to improve, but there definitely are ways that we can work on improving them. Another thing that could be driving deeper hormonal fatigue is thyroid dysfunction. What is missed in a lot of women is Hashimoto's, an autoimmune condition that causes antibodies against the thyroid, which is typically not something that we screen for in traditional medicine, but it is something we test for often in functional medicine. Another thing that could be happening with the thyroid is something called subclinical hypothyroidism, where you don't have levels of your thyroid being really high or really low. They're kind of in that range where they're starting to become abnormal, but your thyroid is still producing the hormones in a normal way. But the way that your pituitary gland is regulating the hormones is starting to become a little bit off. The last thing that I wanted to mention that could be driving hormonal fatigue is actually an imbalance in your gut microbiome. We have a lot of neurotransmitters that are created in the gut microbiome and in the gut. There's also conditions that can lead to imbalances throughout the whole body that can happen in the gut. And so that could be a huge driver for what is causing more significant hormonal fatigue. So as I mentioned, there's several things that could be driving that hormonal fatigue, but there's definitely things that we can do. One, to investigate what is happening inside of your body by doing more in-depth testing. For example, we could do the cortisol testing on your saliva or your urine. We can also do more in-depth hormone testing on the urine. The test that I particularly like to do is something called a Dutch test, which is a dried urine test. And it looks at all your hormones in detail, as well as the metabolites of your hormones. And then some additional information that we like to get is from the gut microbiome to see if there's inflammation the balance of bacteria that you have in there. And we combine all of that information, the hormones, the gut information, blood tests to look at your thyroid, inflammatory markers, nutrients. We combine all that together, and then we come up with a very personalized and targeted plan for you. So I wanted to end this video today by saying, if your fatigue feels like it's unusual, that's usually a sign that there's a deeper imbalance happening inside of your body. It is normal to feel a little bit fatigued if you haven't gotten a good night's sleep once in a while, or you're busy, exercising extra than you should be, or you're, maybe just recovering from a virus or another type of infection. That is normal to temporarily feel a little bit more tired. But if you have a profound fatigue day in and day out, it's definitely time to get that checked out and figure out what's happening.